where you ask, whatever questions you have are like going to be more interesting than sort of the generic material that we'll be talking about today. As well, I believe the session's being recorded, so feel free to take as many notes as you see fit, but again, you'll have access to the video afterwards. Any questions before we jump in?
Any questions?
Cool. Again, feel free to unmute yourself or drop a question in chat anytime throughout the presentation today. Okay, so first things first, I did want to introduce my office. So Graduate Career Services is a resource available to all graduate students. And we can help you with sort of every stage of the job search process, all the way from identifying opportunities to applying to them, interviewing, negotiation, all of that. Not quite fun stuff, but I think important stuff. So if you have any questions around that, we do workshops like this for specific audiences. We do one-on-one appointments. So if you want to talk to someone about your document in detail, or if you want to talk to someone about an upcoming interview, you can do that. And you can book all of that on Handshake. So it's ucla.handshake.com/edu, which is linked out here. And again, you'll get a copy of these slides. So all of these materials you'll have ready access to. Okay, so I think what's most important is that there's like a lot of advice out there around resume. And like, I don't think ours is perfect, or I don't think ours is the best, but most of our, or actually all of our advice is sort of built around these three questions, right? So what is a resume? Who is reading them and why? Anyone in chat want to answer any or all of those questions? Nope. Any takers? All good. Okay, so, here we go. So from Catherine, resumes provide a brief overview to the hiring team of what applicable skills or experiences you have, page of all your qualities and accomplishments. Yeah, great. No, I think these are really good elements. For our purposes, right, the resume is a focused summary of relevant skills or experiences, right, which Catherine and Alice, I think you both touch on. Next up, it's read first by an AI system and then by people, right, and typically multiple people who are coming to the document with different levels of experience in different ways, right? So an HR person or a recruiter has a lot of experience looking at resumes, and they may not necessarily have experience as a nurse, right? Whereas the hiring manager, who could be a more senior nurse, they don't look at resumes as often, but they know the work itself much more closely. And finally, the reason why people are looking at these are to decide who to interview. That's it, right? So it doesn't need to be sort of a perfect document or a perfect summary of everything that's valuable about you. It's just supposed to get them interested enough where they want to talk to you, right? So with that in mind, a couple of things with resume. One is the fact that very little time is going to be spent on your resume on first pass, right? So this means that when you apply to a thing, you upload your resume into their online system, and that is sorted into a yes, no, maybe pile by an AI tool called ATS, Applicant Tracking Systems. After that filter, the yes pile is sent to either a recruiter or a hiring manager, and they will do a quick scan of resumes. And that initial scan by the first person, they're going to take about 7 seconds. It's just because of the volume of applicants that are coming in. So it's on you, it's on us to make sure that our documents are really easily scannable and sort of fit to norms as much as possible, right? Because the people who are going to be looking at these things are going to be looking at them in a huge volume. So we need to make sure that the document is as easily scannable as possible. So that's, again, where a lot of our advice is coming from. Okay, so format stuff, and again, you'll get a copy of this. It's all pretty standard stuff. I think the most important thing to know is that it should be incredibly boring looking. Again, people who are going to be looking at this document look at this type of document a lot. So you want to make sure that it is kind of a standard layout and format as possible. Yeah, so a couple of things. That I want to point out. Next up is the resume sectioning, right? So I think most people are familiar with contact information, education, a professional experience. In most cases, for people who are new grads, either like new graduating from undergrad, graduating from a master's, graduating after having significant experience, the layout of the document is going to look pretty similar, but it's going to be really focused in on, again, what is most relevant, right? What is the most relevant information that they need to know about you? For nursing resumes in particular, an example order that makes a ton of sense is going to be your summary, and then your skills, experience, education, certifications. This is if you're more senior. If you are sort of earlier on in your career, this will likely be a summary and then an education section, a skills section, a clinical training section, and maybe a certification section, right? So again, it's going to be what is most relevant to the role that you're applying to. And we'll get into some more detail as to how we write about those previous experiences. But again, 7 seconds, right? So the document has to do a bunch of wild things, right? It needs to ideally get through that AI scan, and then it needs to pass that sort of 7-second scan, and then it needs to hold up to very close scrutiny, right? So the document is doing a lot. So that's why we recommend sort of taking the time and writing the document with care, particularly because it's going to be seen by many different people, and again, it's going to be read in different ways. And these are just some tools and resources that we recommend checking out. And again, you'll get a copy of these slides with all these links. Okay, so now getting into some strategies. Like I mentioned earlier, a profile or summary is pretty standard with most nursing resumes. And essentially, it is just a place for you to get all of the most important stuff at the top of the document, right? So this is going to be a description of either your strongest traits. It's going to mention any specific skills, any specific clinical skills or experiences you may have. It may include specific patient populations that you worked with in the past. It can include particular type of clinical context that you're working in, right? If most of your clinical training is in big hospital systems versus a community health clinic, right? All of that information is going to live at the top of the document. And the order of that information, again, needs to follow what is most relevant to the job that you're talking about today, right? Or the job that you're applying to today. And just a couple of small notes. Again, pick your strongest traits or the traits or experiences that are most closely aligned with the job that you're applying to. Identify those specific skills, specific experiences, specific achievements, and as much as possible, give them a number. So got a question, will we be discussing a CV? We won't be discussing a CV, but I can also send resources about writing CVs that can go along with these slides.
We do have a question from the RSVP form. It says, can you please discuss the importance of an objective statement and how it can improve applications?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, so the objective statement or this profile or summary statement, it's your opportunity to get the most relevant content into one section, right? So during that 7-second scan, someone familiar with nursing resumes is going to be reading this first and fairly closely, right? So it's just what are the highlights that you want them to know about you from the jump. Yeah, I think that's one of the most valuable things about this, right? In other types of industries where you don't have this profile or summary, it can be kind of tricky to get the most valuable stuff all at the top. This is your opportunity to lead with your strongest traits first, right? Okay. Next strategy is this XYZ approach, right? So this is coming from a former Google people operations person, but essentially it is just the fact that the resume, the bullet points should communicate achievements or strengths not just generic job responsibilities. Yes, yeah, we do take one-on-ones, and you can book them at ucla.joinhandshake.com/edu. Oh, yes, I do. I only work with master's students, and I've been working with master's students from the School of Nursing for about 5 years now. So have a bit of experience working with nurses on their materials. Yeah. And I'll also drop my email in chat. Again, the fastest way to book a one-on-one with me or someone on my team is via Handshake, but I'll also drop my email address in chat in case you have any other questions. Okay, so back to sort of this XYZ approach, right? It is making sure that every bullet point on the document isn't just taking up space, but is communicating something valuable or relevant from your experiences, right? So what is XYZ? So X is an achievement, right? It's something that you accomplish, not just a responsibility that you had, right? It's a very slight reframe, but it's an important one because it changes what could be sort of generic sounding job responsibilities into demonstrations of your effectiveness as a nurse, right? Y is going to be a success metric. Again, those numbers, those are going to be quite valuable, just because it demonstrates the scope and scale of the work that you've done in the past. And Z is going to be the action or actions you took, right? So every bullet point isn't necessarily going to have all three, and it's not necessarily going to be in this XYZ order, but it's just sort of notes to yourself that when you're writing or rewriting your resume bullet points, does a bullet point have at least one of these things, right? Is it sharing an achievement? Does it share a metric of success? Does it demonstrate actions that you've taken as opposed to things that you were just sort of responsible for, right? So this is an example for trained junior staff and best charting practices, right? So this could be something that lives in a more senior role, right? So maybe a nurse practitioner. Just by including the number of increased patients seen per day, as well as, again, that number itself, it's a much better demonstration of the effectiveness of this person's work, right? Instead of trained junior staff and best charting practices, trained junior staff and best charting practices and increased patients seen per day by 20+%. And again, these numbers don't need to be exact, and there doesn't need to be like a proven causal relationship between the number and the work that you're talking about. It should make logical sense, but this is not an academic document, right? You're not making, it's not an academic document. It is something that is just supposed to contextualize your work and its effectiveness, right? So other ways to do that here. So train junior staff by in best charting practices and increase patient seen per day by 20+% by developing and implementing new EMR input protocols, right? So this is going to make a lot of sense if the person is applying to a role where training junior staff is an important component. If they're moving into, again, a leadership role where developing protocols is going to be really important, then you would lead with the development first. Right, so you can be flexible in the order of all of this content. Again, always making sure that the most relevant information is going to be as far to the left as possible in the document. Okay. A strategy that I recommend, we have this worksheet, and you can also just use like a Google spreadsheet of just write out your bullet points in this way. Grad students love a worksheet, I think, just because it's a very finite amount of work to do, as opposed to just sort of trying to write all of this stuff from scratch. Okay, and a strategy that I touched upon in the XYZ is the quantification piece, right? Of like what numbers can you draw out? And again, the numbers are there to demonstrate the scale and scope of your work. And particularly in a document that is mostly letters, our eyes are drawn to numbers in a way that just is because they stand out. And further, it can really concretize and like make solid work that can feel otherwise abstract or kind of vague. And elements that you can include, and you can check out these links here as well. Budget, money, size of teams that you were working on, number of patients you were seeing, sort of on average, number of hours that you were in a particular clinical training scenario, the size of the units or the number of beds that you were working on, right? There are many different ways to quantify the work that you're doing. And it just sort of transforms something that is very vague sounding, right? Of like treating patients versus treated approximately 50 patients per day on a care team of 10, right? It just, we get a much more concrete understanding of the work that you've done. And it's much easier for a hiring manager to imagine you doing work when they have these numbers, right? It's much easier for them to imagine what you could do on their team using these numbers. All right, so actually we're gonna skip this, but you can go ahead and check this out. This is another sort of recommendation I have while resume writing. If you're stuck, give yourself a very finite amount of time to work on the thing. Right, if you need to write new bullet points or you need to revise a part of your resume, give yourself 3 minutes and like you have to produce something and then you can go into editing. And editing is always much easier than writing. Next strategy I want to talk about is using the job description. This is really, really valuable because all you need to do essentially is use their language to talk about your experiences. That's it, right? That's sort of the there. There are some AI tools that do this very okay, like incredibly okay, and definitely need your eyes to check and reread them. But the process really is looking at the job description, identifying the bullet points, the job functions, desired qualifications that are relevant to your experiences. Next is getting language from either something you've written in the past or just straight up using their language. And finally, it's using their language, whether that's to edit previous version of your resume or when you're writing something from scratch, just using their language to talk about your work. And again, including a number if possible, or including some sort of achievement if possible. Right. So again, it's about making it really easy for a hiring manager to imagine you working for them, right? Or imagine you on their team. And an easy way to do that, and an easy way, not an easy, an effective way to do that is by using their language, and that's also effective for the AI scanning tools that are used today. All of those tools are sort of proprietary, and everyone sort of hides what they're looking for, but based on the outside, it seems to be keyword match and priority on page. So again, using their language is really valuable for those purposes. Okay, and just a sort of a quick example of what this might look like, right? So this was a remote NP job. So I think something valuable you can do, if you already have a version of your resume that you'd rather edit instead of starting from scratch, and I think in most cases, editing makes more sense. So take a look at the job description and do some highlighting of some keywords. And then take a look at your resume content and see where things sort of line up, but they're using this sort of very different language, right? And then how can you use their language to talk about your work? And again, it's literally just steadily taking words from the job description to describe your previous work. This is the resume tailoring process. I feel like people are told all the time to like quote unquote tailor their resume, but aren't told what that means. This is what that process looks like. And it can be pretty tedious. And again, there are some AI tools that do a very okay, I cannot stress enough. They do a very okay job that requires human oversight. My other sort of recommendation is to grab 2 or 3 job descriptions that you're really excited about and use that language to develop your resume, and that sort of becomes the base. Because ideally, right, every resume that you submit is as tailored as possible, but logistically, that is a lot of work. Yeah, I'll share one in a later slide, but TLHQ has something like that. TLHQ has a job tracker tool. So instead of like having to copy and paste all of the information about a job, like if you find it on LinkedIn, TL can automate that process. So you like install a browser extension and you click one thing, and the like name of the job, the name of the company or hospital, the due date, and all of that information is collected in a spreadsheet. That tool, that job tracker, is really, really effective. I cannot stress it enough. I really recommend that if you're going to be doing a job search, that you at least check it out and see if you like it. It also has sort of this matching tool of like you upload your resume and upload a job description, and it'll try to do some of that matching for you. It's an okay tool. It's a good place to start. I've had some clients have some success with ChatGPT, but typically it just it produces stuff that's really wordy. So I do recommend whatever it produces, that's the beginning of your document, not the end of your document, right? So whatever an AI tool produces, make sure that you go back and check it and make sure that it reflects the reality of your experiences, as well as reflecting your voice or your experiences in some way, shape, or form. Okay. And so another strategy is to do what's called a comprehensive resume, where you write essentially a really, really long resume. I don't think I mentioned this earlier. In almost all cases, you're going to want a one-page resume. If you do have 2 pages, you need to make sure you fill both pages and that the back page can be sort of ignored, right? If someone prints out a 2-page resume and they leave the second page in the printer, the first page should still read as a complete document. But again, in almost every case, we recommend the one-page resume because that's the amount of time people are going to be spending on things, right? They have a very limited amount of time. But when it comes to this tailoring process, right, we recommend you can write sort of an extra long resume called a comprehensive resume, where you write down sort of every experience you've had. This is particularly helpful for clinical training, right? It's just like it can be really difficult to fit all of your clinical experiences with sort of a lot of bullet points onto one page. So do that write-up for each of your clinical experiences. And then essentially you're just going to pick and choose what content you're going to bring over to a resume for a specific job based on the job description, right? So if you did clinical rotations in sort of different specialties, then you're going to want to emphasize the specialty that's closest to the job that you're applying to. But it is valuable to have sort of every clinical experience written out in some way, just so that you can always sort of pull content instead of having to write it from scratch. Yeah, so from the comprehensive resume, you're going to be sort of pulling information or taking information from the comprehensive and copy and pasting it into the resume for the specific job that we're talking about. Yeah, that's the resume tailoring system. Yeah, again, getting it down, getting your skills, your accomplishments, your experiences into one page can be difficult. I think the things that make that difficult, or mistakes people can make, are including irrelevant experiences. So if you have roles that just sort of aren't related to your nursing career, there may be some cases where you don't have a ton of experience, so it makes sense to include those things. But you should focus in on what's transferable from those experiences to your nursing work, right? The next piece is including irrelevant parts of experiences. So to go back to that sort of clinical example, if you are applying for a nephrology job, you don't necessarily need to list sort of every responsibility or every bucket of work you had during an OB/GYN clinical training or rotation period, right? So it's just sort of making sure that the parts of experiences, the bullet points that you're sharing, are relevant to the job that we're talking about. And finally, again, it's listing job responsibilities versus your contributions. And the way that we demonstrate those contributions are being achievement focused and sharing those numbers where possible. Okay, any questions on resume?
Any questions?
Okay, again, feel free to drop in chat if you have any questions. Otherwise, I'm going to move on to cover letter. Yeah, awesome. Okay, so great question. What about parts of customer service jobs? I feel like skills from customer service can be translated to nursing. Nico, that's exactly it, right? So if you had customer service jobs, then talking about working with the public or working with customers, right? If customers were patients, you'd be using probably a lot of the same language. So one of the things that I've done with some folks that I've worked with who are in nursing, who have sort of customer service experience, is to use language from the job description, just swap out patient for customer, right? So you talk about providing services or providing care to people, but they're customers, they are patients, right? So that work can be helpful. Other things that can be helpful are sort of operations pieces. So if you helped, excuse me, from that customer service role, if you were someone who was sort of involved in making sure that the like materials were always available for whatever was needed, or you helped with budget stuff, or you helped with any of that, all of that can also be transferable depending on the job. Yeah, I hope that's helpful. Yeah, okay. So next up is cover letter. And again, a lot of advice out there about cover letter. I think ChatGPT and other AI tools are really, really bad at writing cover letters because they're incredibly vague, right? Sort of like by design, they're probability machines. So they're going to give you what's most likely to come up. And because of that, they write sort of really generic and fluffy and like non-specific sounding documents. So with cover letter, really do recommend that you just sort of write it yourself, or if you do use ChatGPT, that you like edit it quite a bit. But getting to the question of what is a cover letter, it's your opportunity to sort of connect the dots between the work that you've done in the past and the job that you're applying to today. And that's actually something that's quite difficult for AI tools to do, right? You can give it information, but it can't necessarily make logical inferences or arguments as to connections between those two things. And because of that, we read a lot of really bad cover letters that were written by ChatGPT, and I don't want you to be wasting your time.
Quick question for you. Can you actually tell when a cover letter has been written by AI?
Not 100% of the time, but I have a friend who's a recruiter at Google, and like she literally just looks at resumes and cover letters for 40 hours a week. And like her team has been experimenting, and they're around like 95% accurate.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, just because if you keep reading so many of the same kinds of
You
documents,
realize, huh?
yeah, and
Yeah.
I think a lot of it is kind of maybe not subconscious, but just like picking up small things. There are certain like keywords or phrases that most people don't write in, but a lot of like AI slop on the internet uses that language. So that's where so much of their data is coming from.
Cool.
So yeah, I've had like a 75% success rate. Like I've had clients show me their cover letter and we'll go back and forth. I'm like, was this ChatGPT? And typically it is. But all that to say, the thing that makes AI tools not effective at cover letters is their sort of bent toward being generic, right? And we'll talk about how to be specific through these documents. For cover letter, the most important thing is that it has the same heading as your resume. So it looks like your entire application has like one cohesive letterhead. Same if they make you sort of upload a document listing your references or your preceptors, make sure that every document that you upload uses the same heading so that everything looks sort of cohesive and professional looking. It's a really small thing, but it can set you apart in a compelling way. It just shows an attention to detail that hiring managers typically respond well to. And the cover letter, I don't know how else to describe it. It's essentially a 5-paragraph essay. You have an intro paragraph that ends with a thesis statement, and we'll get to that. And then you have a couple of body paragraphs that share examples, and then you have a closing sort of conclusion paragraph. But that intro paragraph is actually fairly brief. You indicate the role that you're applying for, how you found it, any referrals or relationships you may have with folks who are working at that place. And then you close with, again, a thesis statement. I don't quite know how else to describe it, right? So what I mean by thesis statement is something like, oh, based on my experiences working in neonatal care and working with immigrant populations, I believe I'd be a strong candidate for this role, right? And that neonatal care and working with immigrant populations those are going to be your two body paragraphs. And then we have a closing paragraph, and we'll get into how we talk about the body paragraphs in just a bit. Yeah, so for the cover letter, it is there to help you sort of, again, connect those dots between your experiences and the job that you're applying for. And the best way to do that is to provide some context and some in-depth examples of your work, how it relates to the job. And this is why ChatGPT often struggles to be good, because it can't give you in-depth examples because it doesn't actually know your experiences. It actually doesn't know anything, right? But it doesn't know your experiences. So again, a bunch of resources that you can check out. Skip that. The other piece is to make sure that the body paragraphs that you choose either really highlight something that is unique about you or something that you're really strong in, and or something that is brought up sort of again and again in a job posting. Right, so this is that same remote nurse practitioner job that we were looking at in a previous example. But some things to look out for, right, are sort of hardworking, caring, compassionate, comfortable giving and receiving feedback. The reason why we picked these is because these are really hard to talk about in a bullet point, right? So the cover letter allows you to provide sort of a more narrative example, a more sort of story-based example to talk about your work. But the reason being, the resume can feel impersonal in some ways, right? It's sort of that like summary of achievements, and it can't necessarily highlight individual stories. The cover letter helps you, provides an opportunity for you to share those individual stories of working with like a specific patient or doing a specific type of procedure. It just allows for some specificity that's a really good complement to the sort of overview provided by the resume. So another sort of thing to think about with cover letters is, despite the fact that they're called cover letters, they're actually often read last in the review process. And typically they're not read super closely unless they've already looked at your resume and are interested. So the cover letter is very much a complement. It's an expansion of the resume instead of sort of its own document. So again, the intro paragraph, really brief. And it really sort of ends with that thesis statement. The reason why I come back to it, that thesis statement, quote unquote, again and again, is because it helps people scan the resume more clearly, right? If the last sentence of that intro paragraph says, I'm going to talk about X, Y, and Z, the body paragraphs better be X, Y, and Z. Otherwise, it's actually quite disorienting to read. So in this case, right, their thesis statement, quote unquote, is, I'm certain that my strong detail orientation and comfort with giving and receiving feedback would make me excel in this role. So we know that there are going to be two body paragraphs, one about detail orientation and one about giving and receiving feedback. All right. Okay. So we've decided sort of what strengths we want to highlight. How do we talk about them effectively? And we recommend using what's called the CART framework here. And we'll go back to the previous example, but essentially the CART framework, this comes from interview prep. And if you have any questions about interview prep, please don't hesitate to reach out. We do mock interviews with folks all the time. So if you are not comfortable with interviewing or just sort of are out of practice because it's been a while, don't hesitate. We can do mock interviews or do sort of prep strategy sessions as well. But this comes from interview prep. If you Google how to prepare for an interview, you'll see STAR, START, CAR, CART, PAR, PART, CARL. There's a lot out there. It's all basically the same. People just need to drive like clicks to their blog and whatnot. But essentially, it is these 4 points that are really important when you're telling a story about a professional experience. One is the context, right? So what role were you in and what were you working on, or what types of patients were you working with? What kinds of care were you providing? Next up is the action, right? What's a specific thing that you as an individual did in order to achieve positive results? Next up is those results, or are those results? How did you positively impact your team, the clinical scenario that you were in, or a specific project that you were working on? And finally, the takeaway. This is actually the most important part. Why is this relevant to the job we're talking about today? Right? Why are you sharing this story with me? Without the takeaway piece, without that T, you're just telling them a nice story and not necessarily directing them to think about why this story would make you a good fit for the job. So To go back to this example here, this is sort of highlighted out for cart, right? So if you want to take a quick sec to read this. And again, it's not necessarily even between the four different components, right? So there seems to be a little bit less results than context, actions, or takeaway, and that's okay. It's just a matter of these four elements should be touched upon and should be touched upon in this order, right? It's sort of a very logical and easy to follow way for you to present a story. And again, that takeaway, that sort of last sentence or two, is going to be taking language from the job description, right? Providing a positive telehealth care experience. That's, I'm sure, straight from the job description. Yeah, okay. And then another example here. So this one was about someone who was training folks. So this is someone who was serving as a preceptor at some point, I think. Yeah. And you can see here that the action is actually quite long, right? There's a lot that they're trying to tell. And again, this is to emphasize the fact that this is a narrative example, right? Your bullet points can only tell so much of a human story. The cover letter provides space for you to be a person and provides you a lot of space to sort of communicate a story in a human way that tends to be pretty effective in getting people to remember you or to remember your application materials. Right, and like these aren't perfect examples by any means, but I think they're very clear in structure, which is why we've adapted them from clients' work. And similar to the XYZ worksheet, we have a cart worksheet. We also, you can also just use like a Google spreadsheet to sort of organize your thoughts and just sort of give yourself the space to organize the story around these four different components. And we'll get break. And finally, the closing paragraph. You're just being appreciative of their time, summarizing what you stated above, and expressing your eagerness to talk about your fit for the role. And again, like I mentioned earlier, the cover letter is often the last thing that they're going to read from you in detail, right? They're going to look typically at the application that you had to fill out, and then they'll take a look at your resume. And if they're interested, they'll sort of more deeply look at your resume. And if they're still interested, then they'll take a look at your cover letter.
Question.
Yeah.
Is the closing paragraph where you can ask for an interview?
Yeah, so not even asking for an interview. So there's this language, sort of the like, I look forward to meeting with you.
Okay.
It's kind of the level of confidence that we want people to be using, right? Not like, oh, I already have the job, but instead like, hey, I've made this argument as to why I'd be a good fit. I would love to talk about that more.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. And also like American, like white collar work culture, right? Like confidence will get you very far.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a small thing, but we do recommend that language. So I look forward to meeting with you. I think it's the right balance between, yeah, really good question. Okay, and then kind of similar to the comprehensive resume strategy that we were talking about earlier, I do recommend basically coming up with a modular cover letter. So writing a really long cover letter and then just picking what skills you want to highlight for each job that you are applying to. And it goes into more detail on this, but essentially it's just writing a cover letter that instead of 2 to 3 body paragraphs might have like 6 or 7 examples. And then no matter what job you apply for, you can pick the 3 most relevant ones. And then you just sort of change that thesis statement to match that. And you end up creating something that feels really tailored that actually wasn't that much work on your end. So it's a little bit more of a time investment up front, but it allows you to apply to things much more flexibly. And like talking with my clients and based on my own experience, cover letters are the things that have probably made me lose out on more opportunities than anything. Of just like, oh, I don't want to write this cover letter, I'll do it later, and then the job like gets taken down. Whereas like a resume feels a little easier to deal with, but cover letters, something about them, I think because they're such a bizarre document, often prevents people from sort of like sitting down, writing a cover letter is enough of a barrier for people to sort of procrastinate on an application to the point where that opportunity might disappear. So I do recommend that you put together this sort of long cover letter so that writing this thing becomes super easy in the future. Yeah, any questions on cover letter? Couple of things to think about with cover letter is being redundant. The cover letter should introduce new information, right? Again, they're not going to be reading the cover letter with any closeness unless they're already interested in you based on the resume. So think about them reading the cover letter with the context of your resume already in their mind. Next up is not including a specific example or story that demonstrates your value add to previous teams you've been on. One of the mistakes that we often see is people will bring in cover letters that are really vague. They're like, oh, I have a lot of attention to detail. I'm very detail oriented. And like, that's actually quite hard to prove unless you tell me an example of you being detail oriented, right? And then finally, a mistake we see is not including a cover letter at all. This is changing in different industries, but in nursing, it's still pretty much the norm. Even if it says that a cover letter is optional,
Still do it.
you should still do it. It demonstrates
Part of the process.
Yeah, it demonstrates your willingness to sort of go above and beyond what's considered necessary. It's like a weird, it's a very weird norm, but
Like an unspoken rule.
yeah. But again, if you have that modular cover letter, writing, quote unquote, writing a new cover letter is much less of an ask than before. Okay, so that is all I have for you today. Are there any questions in the room?
Any questions?
Yeah. Hope that is all helpful.
Yeah, I have a question. Sorry, I think it might be easier to ask than to type it.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, go for it.
Hi Juan, thank you so much for your time. I've really learned a lot. I know you gave me your email, but I'm on the Handshake, is it Handshake website?
Mhm.
And I am trying to book an appointment with you since you focus specifically with nursing students. But I don't, do you think you can guide me a little bit on how to schedule that directly with you?
Yeah. If you can shoot me an email, I can send you a resource on how to do that.
Oh, okay, great. Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome. I think there's also a question in chat. Oh, when are these slides? I think Juan, you already have a copy of them, right?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
can send them out.
Yeah, so
I'll send them out afterwards.
Yeah, so probably before the end of the day today. Awesome. I hope this was helpful. Again, I'll drop my contact info in chat. Again, I'm Eddie Cleofe. I'm the assistant director of master students. So if you are not a master student, I can direct you to the correct person at the Career Center. Okay. Perfect.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Have a good one. Thank you, Eddie.
Have a good rest of your day.